Building a house can bankrupt you if you're not careful. And we haven't even got together with the unscrupulous part of the business, say a contractor. They can run off with money. You have to be careful.
I am the person who managed the construction costs from its inception all the way to the end. When it comes to payment, we don't just pay the contractor what he said he does, but we assess what he does and then make payment recommendation.
Aside from getting a nice, beautiful home, to know that you can sleep in it and it won't drop down on you. So my role is very critical, where I would come in, take the architect's drawings, assess it, to load it, because if you cannot have the right infrastructure for your development, how can somebody live there?
As an architect, one of the most important roles, we're the conceptualizer of the dreams of whatever our clients are.
In a perfect situation, I work hand in hand with all these three gentlemen here. Jamaica can be a paradise. It can also not be a paradise.
We're going to move on to our second panel. And as I said, this panel is going to be on navigating construction. And we have a couple of gentlemen that are going to be joining us on stage. First up, we have Conrad Jackson. He's an architect with the Lloyd J. Robinson and Associates. Conrad. Next up, we have Phil Turnbull. He's a quantity surveyor at APEC. Come on, Phil. Next up, Ryan Johnson. He's a structural engineer at Aztec. And last but certainly not least, we have Mark Martin. He's a landscape architect at Gardenism. Make him feel welcome. All right. So I just listed some very specific titles, right? Because when you're building property, I didn't know we had to pay attention to all of these titles. So I'm going to give all of them the opportunity to explain your role in the building process. We want to start off with the architect. So Conrad, what is your role and why should I not try to bypass you when I'm trying to build a property?
All right, good morning, everybody.
Morning.
So as an architect, one of the most important roles, we're the conceptualizer of the dreams of whatever our clients are. So from inception to end, we offer services that we can start from the first initial interview with the client to figure out what the brief is all about, and also doing a site visit of what the site environment is all about, to doing the design, getting approval from the client, working through the construction drawings ready for submission to the local authorities, which would be considered the pre-contract stage. The post-contract stage of construction is where the architect is hired to monitor the works and to ensure that the works are done in accordance to the building code regulations of Jamaica.
So you're with us all the way through?
If hired by the client for pre and post contract, it doesn't always happen that way.
Okay.
So it all depends on what the client chooses. But we always recommend that the client hires us for both stages.
Is the cost in the pre-stage a lot, is it very significant versus if I brought you on in the post stage?
Okay, so architects usually charge one of three ways. It's either a percentage of the construction cost, an hourly rate, or a lump sum charge. Now, the pre-construction cost is usually about 70 to 75% of the whatever the fees would be. And usually it's the post-contract is between 25 and 30%. And the post-contract fees would usually be spread out over the amount of months and prorated about over the months that it would cost for the time for construction, the time period for construction.
All right, thank you so much, Conrad. So to you now, Phil, why do I need to include you?
I'm Phil Turnbull. I'm a quantity surveyor. I am your cost consultant. I am the person who managed the construction costs from its inception all the way to the end, if you will have me. My role helps at the pre-construction stage to prepare a document, what we refer to as a bills of quantity. That entails the material involved that the architect specified for the work that you have briefed him on for the construction to take place. My job is to produce that bill of quantity, price the cost of it, and to advise you what that construction cost would be like. And as the building progress, I help to manage it to ensure that we fall within budget. And if you have a change of heart, what we call a variation, I will then introduce to you the additional costs thereof. We also do life cycle calculations so that when you're choosing type of material or even equipment or even appliances in the building, we will do a life cycle calculation to tell you that the item you have chosen, how long it will last before you could replace it and what the costs involved in replacing it, as opposed to another type of material that may have an initial higher cost, but later on have a lower maintenance cost. So we advise you on that. And at the end of that, we also identify contract. If you identify a contractor to which to work with, we will formulate the contract, choose a contract. We will advise on which contract is better to go with that particular contractor. When it comes to payment, we don't just pay the contractor what he said he does, but we assess what he does and then make payment recommendation. So all the payment that he wants would first have to identify by the quantity surveyor and approve to say, yes, that work has been done. And then at the end of the day, we do a final account and everybody agrees that this is what the total amount and contract finish.
So why can't I just go down to the hardware and say, all right, so I need XYZ of steel, whatever inch, I need some nail, I need some cement, I'm gonna borrow my friend Van, go pick that up.
Well, you can still do that. But the problem is that you may have, don't purchase it adequate steel, you probably too much steel, and you have a lot of waste, you have to go sell back the steel that you don't want. But I would come in and tell you the precise quantity of steel you want. And probably I will tell you the size steel you want, that after this man tell me what it is that he specified, because he's the engineer. And then, so I take what he designed, what he said can hold up, and I will give you a cost on it.
So how do you charge me for your service?
Like the architect, my job is important too. So I may charge you. Like his, we charge similar by a percentage of the construction cost, by a lump sum, or by an hourly rate.
Do you work for people who are just building a house, or you only work for like commercial?
We work for anybody in construction and everybody. And we advise that before you even agree on what your design looks like with the architect, try to get a QS involved. Because in choosing material, as I said before, the QS will advise you on cost. Because the architect would give you a nice, pretty function and building, but then I will tell you whether your pocket can afford it or not.
I see. All right. So now we go to Ryan. So you are the structural engineer.
Yes.
What part you play in this process for me?
Well, aside from getting a nice, beautiful home, you want to know that you can sleep in it and it won't drop down on you. So my role is very critical, where I would come in, take the architect's drawings, assess it, to load it with all the weights, and can withstand disasters as well, because you don't want to be in a hurricane and say roof blow up, or in an earthquake and you can't come out of the house. So it is important to get a structural engineer to give you a economical design, because again, these persons out there will just build and throw in 10 amount of steel when you don't need 10 steel. Just for example case, you could have used 4 and get your building cost efficient. So my role is to come in, make sure that you have a skeleton for your building that you can, and it's functional throughout any disasters or throughout the whole lifespan. And same as doing the civil engineering work as well, where you know that once we get a heavy downpour, you're not flooded out in a house. Or any other disaster, sewage-wise and stormwater-wise. So that is very critical to any development, because if you cannot have the right infrastructure for your development, how can somebody live there?
So do I call you after I get my architect?
Yes.
Involved? So you come before the cost?
No, I would come after the architect, and then you get the costing afterwards.
Okay. You mentioned a while ago, like even just the climate change and things that can happen and flooding. Walk us through what are some of the considerations me as a client must realistically consider in that part of the transaction.
All right. First, I would consider your location. So you know that if you're near the sea, you're on a hill, inland, and you see the contours of the property. If it's sloping to a certain degree, are you below the road level, higher than the road level?
If we hear about, prone to flooding, that
Yes,
sort of thing.
yes. Those and the soil type, even the soil type is very crucial to your building because you have to know what properties those soil entails to bear the capacity of that building or structure you're putting on top of it.
All right. So after we've battled out those three, we have to also think about the surroundings, right? And, before we even get to the door, just how presentable the entire surroundings are. And so I'm going to now ask Mark, you are a landscape architect. Why are you important in the building process for us?
Thank you for having me here. I work hand in hand. In a perfect situation, I work hand in hand with all these three gentlemen here. A landscape architect, in my opinion, we sometimes call ourselves a first architect, and because the first thing you have before you start building is a piece of land. And if you've never done this before, it's quite frightening because, especially if you're buying here and you live abroad, so you don't know what to expect. What happens when you buy a hillside piece of land? What does that mean to you? So ideally, you need someone, whether it's a landscape architect or an architect with that type of experience, to give you the advice of what you want to build on that piece of land. So if you're starting off with a house in mind first and you get the land after, it may not be the right sequence because the land may cost you far more to develop for the house he designs for you. And then you have to do the structural work. So if you're on a steep piece of land, you're going to require retention devices, like these big walls or a lot of support structures, which he will tell you add a lot more cost to the project. So the secret in all of this is proper planning. Know what it is you want, and first of all, who are you? What do you really want? You can have a professional tell you what is nice, but it's not what you want, and you have to be realistic. Where I come into this, and as I mentioned, in a perfect world, and it's not always a perfect world. Conrad would get a client, and he would immediately put together a team. He will have his QE that he has worked with before and he's happy with, and he has a good relationship. He'll bring them in. Structural engineer, landscape architect, and we form a team. Now, if you can count up the number of people involved, not excluding the interior designer, you can see that there may be a lot of fees. That's why planning comes in to be the most important part. You have to plan what is your budget and be realistic. Building a house can bankrupt you if you're not careful. And we haven't even got together with the unscrupulous part of the business, say a contractor, who they can run off with money. You have to be careful. That's why before they talked about having an adequate legal representation to guide you so you don't waste your money. Jamaica can be a paradise, and it is. It can also not be a paradise for many, okay? So don't be stupid. Think about it. You have a source of knowledge out here and people to ask. So what does a landscape architect do? Naturally, I think my job is the most important. Naturally. But I work hand in hand. We work inside the home. If you design an interior atrium, if you have an indoor lagoon or pool, if you want outside. I have a nice touch where I like the line between the home and the garden is almost invisible. So it becomes one. When I interview a client, and that's the way it goes, clients think they interview me. No, I'm interviewing you to find out who you are. As you walk through that house, there's every window and every view. It's typically ignored. You pass water tanks, you pass dry yards, you pass dog pens, and you think, oh my God, and this person has money. Why? Because nobody held their hand and said, hold on, that's a view. Maybe I can talk with Conrad or the gentleman here and say, how about what would it cost me? Could we shift this? They don't want to hear that no, right? Because you already finished the concept, going into design development. He's starting his pricing, and Mark comes along with a brilliant
We need to
idea.
shift that.
You want to do what? Yes, I know. I've heard it before. The second thing is why we are important to come in early in the project. Because you don't want to start construction on something and then think about landscaping after if you want to put a lagoon in the back of your yard. How am I going to get the machine in there? Or when I excavate for it, where am I going to put the debris? And how much is that going to cost you? And am I going to hire a crane at $50,000 an hour? You don't want to hear that because all of a sudden, poof, your little dream has gone. And now you settle instead of a lagoon, you have a little jacuzzi. Not quite what you had dreamt about, right? You have to plan and talk to your architect. Tell them what it is you're looking for. And if it's a good architect, he will say, no, that's above my pay grade. You need to talk to Mark, okay? And then he'll bring in and then create, along with this film, a budget that is realistic. And also, you know about construction. If he gives you, let's say, a budget of $1 million US, you know you're going to end up paying more. Prices go up. Right now, our building costs in Jamaica, as they will tell you, you used to be able to quote what you mentioned before, $100, Amora said $100 a square foot. That's a certain type of building. When you get into homes, you start at 120. You then find out that you're living in the taste of 150 or 60. And then some of your appliances, you've gone up to 200, okay? So you have to know who you are and be realistic. So all the funds you have is used adequately.
All right. So let's talk about the types of materials we're using for building and their adequacy. Would all of you like to chime in on that? Are homes being built adequately in Jamaica today? And even just commercial buildings too. Let's start with you.
All right.
Conrad.
What Mark was just saying is very important, right? For any project, it's important to plan and to have all the persons you need from inception. Usually the architect is the leader of the team and he coordinates all the other disciplines on behalf of the client, but it's very important. As it relates to material, so for all of us here who are Jamaicans and for the persons visiting, Jamaicans over the years have been used to us doing construction with a block and steel. For the main reason, persons, we live in an earthquake zone, live in a hurricane zone, so we want to ensure that whatever it is strong enough. Now, that has shifted slightly. We're still doing out of block and steel, but doing out of poured concrete now, right?
It's called what?
Poured concrete
Okay.
with reinforcement. And we're also, for flexibility, just like in the States where out of the houses use drywall, using drywall on the inside to allow for the flexibility of change and also saving in cost for construction. There are other persons who would have dabbled in trying things like foam construction. Of course, the beauty of the foam is the insulating properties against heat. But also, Jamaicans very timid when it comes on to change. And that's why drywall took a long time before it started being used sufficiently in Jamaica. So the foam thing is coming, and more people try it, but it's a mindset.
I want to go to Mr. Cost and estimates. When we talk about drywall or when we talk about these foam buildings that we're seeing, what can these, give me a size and on average what they're going to be costing us?
As it relates to drywall, drywall is a method of construction. And it's dry because the material that involved are normally ready-made material, whether it's gypsum board, whether it's cement board, whether it's a new thing called ply-sem, whether it's plywood. The idea is that you use a dry, ready-made material, put it together to form a wall. In some instance, you form cladding. Now, as opposed to block and steel, concrete walls have to have a particular type of finish for it to hold up. If it's used for external purposes, it must give a protection against the element outside. For the internal purposes, it have to have the insulation properties. As sometime and more time, we live in a tropical country. It's thermal properties as well. I tend to find drywall, we can introduce thermal insulation and sound insulation quickly in a drywall construction. You find drywall construction tend to be faster in construction than the wet work. Let's call it wet work, which is mortar, concrete, or block and steel. You find the drywall construction a very fast and quick construction. So if time is money, you know that anything that cuts time really save money. Some instance depends on the combination. The drywall may cost more than the concrete wall in the straight cost construction aspect. But as I said, time save money. So if you're going to build block wall on the inside, it may take you, per argument, 3 months. But if you're using drywall, it may take you a month. So that 2 months you save you money, because you won't have to pay the workmen on site, and the site will be closed within that time. So where that is concerned, it will be a little cheaper. And as I said, it depends on what you choose to be your drywall, can cost as much as the block wall itself.
There are a couple companies locally that produce things. I don't want to call them name because they didn't sponsor us. But for example, do we make drywall materials in Jamaica? Do we have any local entity that make any of the variations of drywall?
No, as a matter of fact, we don't, you know. What we do is we have foam, we import foam, because we really don't make, we start out having some foam factories.
Companies locally, yeah.
Yeah, quite a long time ago. We find it cheaper to import. Yeah.
Really?
Plywood, we import. Gypsum board, we import. A thing we call plysem, which is a fiber type material, man-made. Yeah, we import that too. So most stuff, the only thing that we don't import is blocks, because we make them here. And cement, we make that here.
In terms of the drywall material, how does it stand up to chichi or duckans, as we would say?
Again, it depends on the type of material. The plysem I mentioned, that was designed against termite deterioration. What I find though, that gypsum, the termite, what we call a subterranean termite, the one that move under the building, come up, tend to eat the gypsum out of the gypsum board. And the cement board has some fiber gypsum inside there that they go at too. So the plysem stand up stronger. But what we also have is treated material. We have some treated material that lasts long. Eventually, you know, termite eat everything, but some take longer time than some.
You say everything?
What?
So in terms of, well, that's another concern, because, you know, you have some nice buildings in New Kingston, and every now and again you start to see the little trail, and you're like, it's concrete, so why are we seeing the trails? And you have to bring in, you know, exterminators and that sort of thing. How are we holding up with that?
But the trail is just the movement, you know. That's not where they stay. They're moving from that part to the place where they want to go. So the trail is where they're moving, is the route in which they take to get to where they want to go. Mm-hmm. And they tend to want to go where the wood or the gypsum located.
Mm-hmm. How often would you recommend somebody, you know, has an assessment done and for them to spray for termites and that sort of thing?
I think the land, yeah.
All right.
Yeah,
so Mark, tell me a little bit about
he's
that.
The one
because
that deal with
nature and
yes,
things that are moving naturally. Tell me about your, you know, how often would you advise for us to do an assessment of the space?
I would say it depends on the environment where you live. So I'm fortunate in that the land that I live on is forested. Mm-hmm. So they already have nests there already, and they want to come into my nest. Mm-hmm. Okay? So I'd have an inspection every year. So when I bought this villa that I have, I had subterranean treatment. I didn't like the fact of having to pierce the ground and to do that work. But we inherited the facility infested. So we had to treat it, take care of it, and then once a year we have them come back and make inspections. Mm-hmm. Small little infestations, a homeowner can take care of themselves if they are careful with what they spray and things like that. Mm-hmm. You have to be mindful. Again, this is where landscaping becomes both a pro and con. Mm-hmm. We all love our trees. It creates wonderful oxygen for all of us. It creates shade, gives us fruit and food. However, it's also a house habitat for our chichi, okay? Which is termites, right? And so you have to be just mindful about it. There's ways you can call pest controls to treat it without going crazy. I also have bees at my property, and so I'm very, very careful about the poisons that I use on my trees, because you kill one selective insect, you also kill a bee. And bees are very, very important for everything, agriculture, flowers, plants, our whole livelihood.
So, as you're saying, it is very important to be mindful of that. We cannot just go out there and be killing everything. Fair. Fair enough. So then the next question I want to ask, Mark, so we call you in, you do an assessment, that sort of thing, right? What would you then say we have to be mindful of when it comes on to how close the garden is to the home? Because you like to say you don't want to see a separation. So, but with the garden being very close to the window, we have to think there are other elements that would have to be concerned
That's
about.
a great question. Okay. So, for me, closeness could be that chair.
Okay.
So, all right, let me give you an extreme example. So, we have a client who bought probably the largest property in Trial. And what did he want? Most people develop land, they use that word develop, which means cut down trees and everything living. And then they're able to pour marl, create a foundation that's structurally sound for the architecture, okay? This client wanted his house in a forest. So people were amazed when we started bringing in. I went around Jamaica and I purchased from people's lands. They didn't know me. I went on there and said, can I have that tree? Can I have that tree? Because we didn't have nurseries where I could go and select 500 trees. So we brought 500 mature trees. Each tree had a flatbed, crane, everything to fulfill his dream. Back to your question. You have to be mindful of trees over your roof, depending on your roofing material. Because when you have a nice branch over the roof shading your home, that's a place for a rat to walk along, come across the top. So it's a holistic environment. You have to be aware. But, you know, we have to live with these things. For instance, I have family members, dear friends, who will never come to my villa. Why? I don't have, well, I'm not going to, I don't need burglar bars where I live, number one. We have done the planning. So as much as we can, we have created organic fence around the property.
Like some cacti.
But yeah, but why I mention that is something that the Jamaicans fear. And it's not crime, it's called lizards. Okay? Two things a Jamaican will be very fearful of. What we call dog and lizard. Okay? I have seen grown people walk around my house that look like Quasimodo. They're bending down, looking around, because the croaking lizard is going to pounce on them and suck the blood out of their brain. No lizard in life has ever jumped on me. In fact, every lizard moves away from me, and I'm one of the idiots that go after them to try to grab them. So say, come here, let me touch you, right? No. So back to your question.
The closeness.
You have birds, which they can be messy. I don't normally put certain fruit trees on certain properties because they will ingest, and all of a sudden you find all of these interesting spots around. You must know where to plant a sea grape tree. Why? Because it's fruiting, which is what you want, but you don't want it on the sidewalk. Okay? Planning. You have to talk it out. In Miami, they call this detalles. It's the details. And no detail is too small when things become harassing to you.
All right. The next thing, especially during COVID, we saw where we were being advised that we need to go outside. You know, even on Twitter, you know, the owner there was saying, go outside and touch some grass. the importance of green spaces, whether it's in a residential community or in a commercial space. I want to hear your thoughts on that, and is there more that we can do going forward?
All right. As I've heard, landscaping is a very important part of architecture. Architecture, believe it or not, is about persons, what they like, their moods, what they gravitate towards. The environment, of course, is an integral part of sustainability, but not only our health, but the health of the building and those around us. So when you hear people talk about green architecture, it's very, very important. So greenery, especially in COVID time, when we're locked up in our house and we get to go out for 2 minutes, we're happy. That's why in Jamaica, some persons would have find some backyard to go try lime and just socialize. They're just glad to see people and persons, all the persons within your house. So the environment in which we create for ourselves in design of buildings, in design of the green space is of utmost importance for health and humanity.
Right? Quantity surveyor?
As a QS, I just think cost. I just think three things: cost, economics, cost.
So
What is cost?
So where you put it in the line of importance
Yeah,
on the
yeah.
budget, you put that one last, like green space a lot.
No. It's whatever he design, I cost him. I don't go up my way cost anything that is not there. It's whatever he design, I cost. Whatever he comes up with to the client, I cost. So whatever they do, I just cost.
So if I say I need to cut something, what are you going to cut first?
Whatever you tell me to cut, I'll cut. I would advise you.
I can tell you that. Here's the architecture, okay? There's the QS right by him, good buddies. They're inseparable, they have to be. Then you have your structural, can't do without him, or civil. You see down there? That's the landscape architect. Here.
I would argue that's where he was prior to COVID.
Here.
After a while, and we need green space, he came up all the way up here.
So what you're trying to get at is, again, back to planning, it's cost. You can put in a plant this size. And you can put in a plant this size. And you can get a tree fully mature. He's there to advise you. I prepare a budget for my clients. I will hand it over to him, and then he massages to make sure my numbers coincide with what his numbers have. So we're on even page, and I'm not trying to pull a fast one, okay? I had to have a nursery. Why? Did I want to be a nurseryman? No, I did not. But we didn't have a lot of formal nurseries in Jamaica. And people say, well, I have about 1,000 plants. That's nothing when you have a hotel opening. A hotel with you 10,000 plants. If we have one windstorm, there goes some of the nurseries. So it's understanding the environment outside the home is going to become, as you said, far more important, because during COVID, people started to realize something very important: their mental health.
There's a correlation.
And all the trappings you have did not solve that problem. But sometimes communing with nature, you start to feel an energy, and you have a relationship. You hear the birds, you see the trees, you feel the wind, you smell the scents. We're human beings. We're more than just one sense. And that's where we try to come in to make this package far more humane. This width of a pathway, the step down from outside to inside. We have a little trick in Jamaica. I think it's somebody who has an evil sense of humor, or we're very poor in math. Conrad would tell you, some of our stairs in Jamaica should be in the book of records, because you have the floor and you have the second floor where you're going. It's math. You work it out and divide it. No. They start off with the first one 10 inches high, and the end one ends up at 7. And you think by the time you end up at my age, and when I'm reaching up high and I reach down low, oh, Mark is here, okay? So that's why the architect is so important in the process, to make sure that every detail is worked out, especially the older we get.
I'm going to give Ryan a chance to respond in terms of just green spaces and advocating for more of that. What are your thoughts on it?
In whatever the architect designs, that's the best. I can comment and say, all right, you can get enough green space. It's not my job. So my job is just to make sure that you can be in the green space and you're not hurt. Yeah,
So-
best to put it.
For example, we've seen where we have in other countries as well, you see it a lot, like on the roofs, they have this type of gardening that's taking place up
Yes.
there, or we have living walls, as they're called. What are some of your thoughts on those things being incorporated?
Well, all right. And that's more of a civil aspect on my side. Green roof technology. Again, a lot of times when we're in these cities, you want to have some green area, green space, and adding back green areas to the environment. And again, it has a civil benefit where you try to mitigate some amount of rainwater that floods the road at once. So normally you have a slab roof or any finishing type of roof, and you have to still look at how fast the water will leave your rooftop to go on the road. That is how you get flooding, and you're supposed to trap the storm water on the property. So once it goes onto the road, you know that it's a build-up, and drains are designed to take a certain amount of volume of water at a specific rate. So these green roofs will hold the water for a certain amount of time, we call it retention time, and then lets off, and it would bleed away from the whatever soil or grass is on top to go into the environment and then percolate throughout the soil. So it will reduce the amount of flooding that would happen in an area. So it has a lot of benefits. Aside from just beautification, it will help in the environment and lifespan of civil engineering.
There was another thing that would have come up over the last couple of years in terms of rainwater harvesting, and if you're going to be building a residential community, it was going to be mandatory. Shed some light on where we are with that. Is it mandatory now for any new housing development?
I don't know if it being mandatory, but it's something that's very important. As was mentioned previously, and I think some of the speakers to come after us will talk about water going out and leaving the public, leaving private property onto public thoroughfare. That is a no-no, because that contributes to, of course, some of the nice roads we have in Jamaica. When you're driving along, you feel your vehicle rocking from left to right. So, and to add to that, we have challenges as it relates to some of our resources, water and all the rest of that. So it's always good to harvest water, whether rainwater for washing our cars, for landscaping, and if you want to go into Graywater from the house, from your sinks, and so you can also be using that for landscaping. But also, what is very important, a lot of our bigger buildings being constructed in Jamaica, just like in the States, I mean, maybe 15, 20 years ago, a lot of our buildings weren't requiring fire reserve tanks. So as you know, we don't necessarily have the best of fire trucks. They don't come as quickly as possible. So when you listen to the news, you hear, oh, they're doing cooling down operations. Well, especially for bigger buildings, it's a requirement now that they are to have a certain amount of water storage as backup storage, should in case you have fire. So they'll have sprinklers and fire hose reels apart from smoke detectors and extinguishers. So it is, in a sense, important to harness as much of that water as possible for those reasons.
You just mentioned in terms of using some of the water in the home and it perhaps going into the landscaping. Tell me about that network. What has to go into that kind of planning?
Well, from inception, when you're doing a design and you're interfacing with the client, it is important to know where their mindset is and what they are trying to achieve. Here, persons talk about green technology and harvesting of energy and water and that sort of thing. So you can save on money by using things like the water from your sink and the water from the bathroom sink, the bathtub, and to use it back in terms of irrigation. Whether you have backyard gardening or you want to water flowers, it can be used for that. Of
Is
course,
that safe, Mark?
it has to be treated. I think Mark will tell you that.
Okay.
To prevent, because some of the chemicals or soap that you have inside there is important, and it goes through a treatment process before it actually goes into the storage to assist Mark with the landscaping.
Are you seeing that as a trend, Mark? More people being, adaptable to that type of thinking?
Yes, the main deterrence, as with anything, is cost. So, common sense, a cistern makes sense. Water harvesting makes sense. But how do you catch water? All right, you have to build a catchment. If it's under your house, that's another part of construction costs. That's another part of structural work. Okay, so now we have the cistern or this catchment. How do you get it back up into the use of the house or the gardening? You use pumps and you have filters depending. The idea of recycling water is an excellent idea, and we, in the States more so than here, we have what we call Graywater uses, and we have firms that provide gray water for you, like in Montego Bay. I think they do that with Rose Hall. They take the is it sewage or effluents from the hotels, take it up to treatment plant, and send it back down treated for certain uses. So it is very, very useful. The construction that Conrad will do, depending on the type of roof he designs, could be very conducive of catching, collecting more water. And it makes a lot of sense. It will affect his architecture, but it should go hand in hand, because as we live in a storm environment here, his architecture has to be very sensitive to that, so that if we have a windstorm, how does your home survive, or how does a building survive better? So yes, I'm working on high rises now, which have to have subterranean catchments, have to have all the fire equipment as you just mentioned, but it should be done in housing developments also. You'll notice if you came from Montego Bay here, you passed the housing development outside of Grand Palladium, and on the roofs are all solar panels. Great. We are in Jamaica. It's hot. We are in Jamaica. We have our rainy season. And all these things are given to us, right? Free for us to use. But there again is an investment you have to make into the solar panels, into the cistern, and the catchments to make it work. But it's an excellent idea, and I would recommend everybody to speak with their architect or their landscape architects to try to employ these.
The next thing I want to look at is lighting in a space and how that really helps. Let's touch on that a little bit.
All right. Well, one of the things as an architect, one of the things you try to do, which is foremost in terms of a design, especially when we're in the tropics, is natural lighting. So as much as possible, we design our buildings to accommodate as much as possible natural lighting. Artificial lighting is important, but we use it as just a backup system. So it's also important that the balance between the openings you create for lighting, you don't allow for too much sun to come in. Because considering that we're in the tropics and the time is hot, you want to harness the rays of the sun for solar, but you don't want to be cooking inside of the building. So a building can be designed in such a way that it allows for that balance between letting enough natural light, which is soft enough light, but not being overburdened by heat coming into that space. Because just imagine, if you're sitting next to the window over there, and there was not that balcony, you'd feel the sun coming into the window on you. So something as simple as that balcony, you're getting the natural light that the curtains were drawn, but you're not getting the direct heat that you'll be getting being so close to the exterior.
And let me add to that. You can have that window still with the sun coming in on you, but it can cost you not to feel it on the inside. By selecting a double pane window that traps the heat between each pane, now that costs you. And that's where I would advise you, if you want that big window right there because you're looking at the beautiful sea, but that's where the sun set, and when that sunset hit that window and come inside, you feel like you're cooking. But you definitely need it. I would say you can have it, but it's going to cost you this. And if your budget can't do it, I will try to persuade you not to, because it's the thing, as a QS, I work with your budget. So when the stuff that you want, we see how best it can fit into your budget. Because it's best to have a budget first. As the scripture tells us, no man build unless he must know what the cost is like first. Yes, you have a budget first. So you can get that window, but it's going to cost you. Mm-hmm. And as it relates to the Graywater, what make it expensive? Because you have to do separate catchment, separate storage tank. And if you're living in a, if you're on a sloping terrain, for it to run, we naturally cause drainage run down, naturally gravity feed down to the lowest point. But for you to get it back up where your garden is, you're gonna have to pump it. That pump costs money, and it increases your maintenance because you would have electricity operating that pump to carry it up to that point to water the garden. And if you're not keeping the garden, there's no point trying to carry gray water up there, you're not keeping your garden. But the idea is that everything have its cost. If you have a budget, be realistic to your budget for the stuff you need. As a QS, my biggest enemy is HGTV. Because as my client sees something, they say that's what they want. And then boops goes the budget.
I see it in foreign, so I don't see why I can't have it here. All right. On that note, we're now going to open up the floor to questions. Everything was so clear? No questions? Okay. Let's get a mic. One moment. We're going to ask you to step to this side, just in front of the camera. We want to capture everything nice. All right, just step on that side for me.
Hi, so about construction materials.
Materials.
My dream would be to have a lovely bamboo house.
Mm.
The beauty, now I understand, it's nice sway if there's hurricane. How much truth is there to what I'm saying?
The client has come and she wants bamboo. Let's go.
Let them design it first and I'll cost it for you.
So yes, Conrad, what would you say?
But would I survive the hurricane?
Yes, you would.
Yep.
Because, all right, in the US, they still use timbers members and everything to still build, but you still have connection members. So there are type of straps and connections where you can put together. You can have the bamboo line out in one tree, and then all the connections can connect all the bamboos together, and you can still have a member that is going diagonal to it to give you a brace. So a next bamboo can come in place to brace that wall of bamboo that you have. And it's just about the whole metallurgy of construction. And that same bamboo can even frame out your windows and doors so you can still get your structure. Again, everything comes down to your connections and straps.
I thought you were going to say the weir. But Conrad, let us hear your take.
Right, so I have seen construction out here where bamboo has been used. Not many places. But how they had reinforced it was they put steel rods, threaded steel rods through the bamboo. And then they pumped it full of concrete. So you change the element of the bamboo to a structural element, especially given the wind loads that we'd have as it relates to a hurricane and any sort of movement as it relates to earthquake. So there are ways and means of doing it, which is not necessarily the traditional ways you'd have seen them do it in other Asian countries, but there are ways of doing it.
Did you ever do any landscaping on any of these properties with bamboo?
In construction?
You worked on it?
Yes, my entire villa has a bamboo fence. So I had existing bamboo stands on the property. So that was given to me. So I used that because it's like a grass. It's sustainable. So I cut down the bamboo, and what I learned from Jamaicans, even though I was born here, I didn't know this. You have to cut bamboo at a certain time of the month, what they call dark night. And I thought, sounds like rubbish. No, it's in the Farmer's Almanac, all right? It's there, and there's a reason regarding the sap, the movement, the tidal flow, the moon. It makes sense. And how did I learn? Well, some of mine were eaten up in no time at all. But when you cut bamboo down, there is a curing process. You place in water, you cure it, then you dry it, and then you use it. So you have to be, again, mindful. And many of our indigenous contractors here understand those things that are not necessarily taught in classes, right?
So if you don't want to do the full house, you could do a fence, you know?
So the termites seem to be a big issue here. Are there any species, like another insect or birds, that will eat the termite and keep them away?
That you know of?
That sounds like a wonderful dream. Yeah, they not fast enough. It's just like my lizards I employ. They're doing a poor job of the mosquitoes. Okay? All right.
All right, we have another question.
So as the real estate boom continues in Jamaica, you find that in most cities like Kingston and Montego Bay, the real estate product itself becomes more expensive, and there's the complaint that is being pushed out of the parameters of affordability for a lot of Jamaicans. One of the things that I've always said that I'm advocating for is that I think a lot of land is wasted, especially in the city, for parking. In most cities around the world, you're allowed on a quarter acre to get 10 floors high, as long as the structure is sound, back to the engineer, and then a little plot of it is used for green space and none for parking. I personally think a lot of city space is wasted for parking. I believe that in Kingston, in Montego Bay, and Ocho, we need to move now into this phase where more land is used for housing, hence the density will be higher, and then developers will find it more profitable, and then the properties might be more affordable for Jamaicans. What's your take on this? And what would be the implication from a structural perspective and architectural perspective?
You drive?
If I drive?
Yeah. The hardest things to find is a parking in Kingston. Can you drive? What we do with what because of the requirement of the, I'm probably Conrad talk more on this better than I do. But what we're finding, as you rightly said, there is not enough car park availability in Kingston. So if we get rid of the car park there that exists now, we're going to have to build them in structure. So what you find now is that we're incorporating a car parking pan up on our commercial building. I am involved in a particular type of construction now for an entity in which it's about 9 floors and about
First
4 or
floor
5
parking.
floors is parking. And then you go up to the office up there. Because where the land is, there is no place for parking. But it requires parking because it's a public place and people have to come there and people don't take bus there. Because we know our bus system not good none at all. And the taxi man them run on the road and all that. So you definitely need parking. So if you get rid of those things, we're going to have to now tear down quite a few of those buildings and build up new buildings that incorporate parking on the structure itself so that the green space.
But don't you think we are getting to the place now, or probably need to force ourselves into the place where the public transportation sector is forced to the better? The problem is now that the middle class don't take public transportation almost at all, and therefore very few people care. So if we are, let's look at New York, look at Chicago, look at a lot of cities where a lot of the middle class it's too expensive to own a car. So and even a lot of them own really nice homes, $4 or $5 million homes. I know a Virgin of mine in New York who have a $5 million house and he bicycles to work in Manhattan. Very good job. But it's so much easier to ride to work than to own a car or to take whatever else. What if we, rather than wait until the public transportation system is fixed, when all of the land in the city is already used, and then we can do this, push for this now while we still have land, and then because I believe that in Jamaica in particular, the private sector leads almost every element of development.
Well, you're right. But you notice what we build? We build roads. We
Yeah,
don't
that's what I'm
build
saying.
subways, we don't build trains, we build roads. So we're encouraged to buy car, to drive. For me to get here, we didn't have a train system that comes here. It's road. So
I agree.
New York was planned. They have vision to see ahead. When they developed Portmore with lanes and tracks and all of that. Not enough roads. The roads were too narrow. And they still have not finished developing Portmore yet. So I understand what you're getting at, but that out of my pay scale and my because it's a politician decision to say, all right, boy, we have this train thing from Maypen, and we just make it come, just rotten down. Why? Because we didn't see the vision to improve our circulation using the train system or the subway. We can use you notice we don't have tunnels here. We go around and we cut down mountain to get around here. Why? Because we don't look ahead. We don't see that kind of thing. It's nice to see what happened in New York, but we need a culture out here.
But here's a question, and sorry to be, but how will it change? I know it's not going to change from the governmental level. Do you think the tip of the spear is actually going to be gentlemen like yourself who are in the industry who understand what is eventually going to happen if we don't do this? Because one of the concerns I have, Jamaica is a very small island, and because of the real estate boom, there's a build out. So the cities are getting bigger instead of build up. So by building out, we're losing more green space. And I've seen in some parishes where the land that was irrigated and left for farming for hundreds of years being used for housing development, and you can't correct that. So my concern is that we are allowing it to happen how it's happening, and then in 100 years it can't be fixed. Does it make sense for us to stop and think and reimagine how we are developing, hence try to save some of the land and try to force the hand of the government, if you were?
Okay, I think that one is something I respond to. So over the years, one of the things that architects in Jamaica have advocated for is to save the farmlands. So as you have said, a lot of especially in Clarendon and St. Catherine and those areas, out of the lands that were previously in cane and would have been in tobacco at some point in time, they're building houses on them now. Now those lands are good, fertile agricultural lands, flat lands. Part of the reason why that came about, unfortunately, is, as you said, the cost of living. Persons cannot afford to buy some of the real estate that's within Kingston and some of those other places within St. Andrew. So it has caused for sprawling to take place on the neighboring parishes, and they become almost like dormitory communities. Portmore is a good example of that, but one of the good things about Portmore is that there's almost everything over there now, but excepting a hospital and a good enough transportation system. Now, Portmore has almost as much people now as near Kingston. And years ago, it was said that why not put in something like a ferry system, that you leave from Portmore, you come into downtown Kingston, right, and you'd have some sort of shuttle bus that carry you to New Kingston or in and around Kingston. They haven't done anything like that. The same thing goes with the train service. We used to have train service on Montego Bay to Kingston from Maypen side into Kingston. Those things have gone. So as you have heard, Jamaicans love them car. They don't trust the existing transportation system. And unfortunately, if you look at roads like Constant Spring Road and Boulevard and those places, it was just widened a couple years ago. It's a mess already. So they are not thinking beyond that, and it is unfortunate.
You're building the road now to St. Thomas, and they put in the train station. So that the new development all the way, they're proposing a connection between Kingston, St. Thomas, Portland, and come around. And there was no train, no transportation except for motor vehicle transportation. You could put a train system that runs parallel to the road because you're now doing the development. But that thinking is still not there because government get a good amount of money from imported car. So there is self-interest there somewhere.
Some other agenda. Mark wants to respond, and then we have one last question.
Let me just finish up that conversation there. It's all about money, why we don't have it, okay? There's a lot of people in the government that made a lot of money on importing cars. I found an interesting figure recently. Last year, we imported 22,000 cars into Jamaica. That's 1 year. This has been ongoing for the last 5 years, 10 years. Is there any wonder every time you come back to Jamaica or every time we venture out, how longer it's taking us to go from Kingston to here? So Good news. Recently, Jamaica invited University of Pennsylvania and a landscape architecture firm that does big government projects. And they invited them here to do a design project for the waterfront in Kingston, okay? And when I was there critiquing the work of the students and the firm, one of the things that they suggested was to try to bring back the trams that we used to have. So whether or not electrical trams are worthwhile or not, it's part of the discussion, what you're dealing with here. It's not a matter of if we need it. It's just a matter of time for us to do it. We now have Ubers and those types of conveniences for us. And why wouldn't a rail service work here? Think about a rail journey going through the heart of Jamaica, how beautiful that is, okay? It's just a matter of money. We didn't monetize it. And if we found a way for people to make money from it, it will happen right away.
All right, and our very last question for this panel.
We have one question from online and
Yes.
then here. So I think this is going to be from Mr. Turnbull. What do you recommend as far as people trying to save cost? We have someone who's asking, can they source the materials directly from China, Italy, or any other place? Do you have experience with that? Do you recommend it? They want to know, how do you know if the materials will be sufficient? That kind of thing.
Mm.
It's not just Mr. Turnbull, you know, it's Mr. Reed Jackson himself too. But like everything else, sourcing material is the good quality material that you need in your project. When it gets here, there is an imported premium, like the cars them that we complaining about. What you tend to find, if you do it in bulk, you will save. But if you do it for a small unit, it's better you just buy it out here, because out here in our hardware, we have the latest of anywhere, anything, anywhere. But if you're doing it in bulk, if you're doing a development and it's quite a few units, importing would be an economical way to go, whether it comes from Italy or stuff. But then when you have to ensure that the cost of the stuff and the total payment when you get on site would be less than what it costs to purchase it down the road.
All right, I hope that response would have been sufficient. And our final question for this panel.
Okay. All right. So there is a disconnect at times between these wonderful 3D renderings that we see and what ends up getting delivered. We'd love to get your guys' perspective on what is causing that and what we could do to change that, because it's really an issue.
When they put it in AutoCAD and we're like, ooh, I like that.
Yeah, you know, and it's not a matter of not being able to do it, because you see the same thing elsewhere that's done perfectly. I'm talking about the skill level when it comes to finishing. We're very good at raising the structures up quickly, but I feel like the skill level of the individuals who are responsible for the finishes in Jamaica is a bit lacking, and I don't know why.
How would you like to respond, Conrad?
All right. Interesting question, a very good question. So one of the biggest problems that we have is a lot of Jamaicans or persons doing developments choose not to use professionals. Remember, when you have somebody who is a professional, supposed to come with a certain level of credibility and knowledge. When it is that they use a consultant, whether architect, structural engineer, or otherwise, and they only use them to do the pre-contract stage of the work, which is the drawings, and not the monitoring stage, when the contractor is doing whatever he's doing, only you, the client, knows what the contractor is doing. So if you are more technical competent than the consultant who you would have hired, then that's where the problem lies. Because sometimes a contractor will tell you, yeah man, such and such, whatever the situation is. And whatever he's telling you, at the times, may very well be in his best interest. So there's nobody monitoring the construction phase as a professional to ensure that what was designed, whether it be three-dimensional or otherwise, is what is actually being built and delivered at the tail end. So I hope that answers your question.
Let me chime in here. When the architect specify a particular type of finish on a building, then the QS quantify that and specify it in his bills of quantity, and the contractor price it. When the contractor seek to get paid, and the surveyor, that is if you have him on as the post-contract service, go to examine what he said he bills, what he said he's paying for, and that's not what having the BQ, then we won't pay him for that. But then it may be that he would have persuaded you to change, and you don't tell us. And because you don't tell us, no, he gets away with it, and you get what you and him agree with. So the important part is when you employ us at the post-contract service, and we say post-construction services prior, and we put together that bill of quantity based on that specification and all of that. It's important that you have us on for the life of the building for your benefit. So it's not to have a one fee one time. You just get that out of the way. So you have us from the life of the building go straight through. So don't look on it and say, why them cost too much, man, about with it? And the contractor say, yeah, man, I will save you a little thing, and you save a little thing, and you look on your 3D render, you look on your building, and you say, I'm not the right place, man. I say, no, I look on the 3D. And you say, well, you remember when you did cut that thing? And say, oh, I remember, but yes. When we come into the picture, throughout the life of the building, whatever he priced, that's what we insist that he does. Whatever he designed without you change, that's what he insists that he does. And what we ensure happen also is that though the contract is between you and the contractor, we represent you. So he have to speak to us before he speaks to you. So when he speaks to you, you say to him, I'm going to contact my people, my consultants, before you agree on anything.
All right, and on that note, we want to say a special thank. Conrad, you wanted to?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that the consultants are the eyes and the ears of the client. So we act on the client's behalf, but we also act impartial as it relates to any sort of contract and contract dealings between the client and the contractor. So very important to note.
All right, so on that note, we want to say thank you to Conrad, to Phil, Ryan, and Mark for such an insightful discussion.
What's going on? Throp here. I hope you enjoyed that presentation from Throp-X 2023. If you want to learn more about this year's Throp-X, join our mailing list in the link below. And if you want to see another Throp-X video, click right here. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.